Hello, everyone. It's Blaze, and welcome to the controversial rise of Poppy Playtime. I'm excited to see what this is. Almost a 50-minute video, to be honest, but I'm excited to see what it is. So, without delay, let's just start this thing.
In the past 4 years, no game has been as infamous
You can also
as
watch my
Poppy
playthrough of Poppy
Playtime,
Playtime on my gaming
considered by
channel.
many to be
Links in
an
the description
amazing
as always.
boundary-breaking horror title that rivals the top games in the entire genre, while also considered one of the worst by others. The title has had a fascinating rise to the top of the mascot horror scene, filled with surprises, disappointments, lots of controversies,
Yeah,
and
NFT one.
everything in
Not
between.
fun.
So today, I'm gonna go over the entire story of Poppy Playtime's rise, from Chapter 1 all the way up to today.
Chapter
Our
1.
story begins with two animation channels on YouTube, Zamination and Enchanted Mob, who had partnered with each other to help produce content for their respective channels in the past.
Content farm,
However,
lovely.
at some point, they wanted to try their hand at creating a video game. More specifically, a horror game in the same genre of videos they were making content for, mascot horror. So in the background, they partnered together to create Bad Games, their game creation company.
That's not a
would
good
quickly
idea
be changed to Mob
of a name.
Games for
It's not a good
obvious
name
reasons,
idea.
and began drawing up an idea for their very own title. This was not Poppy Playtime, but rather something entirely different that up until this point has never been revealed. While developing this mystery game, another YouTube creator, Isaac Christopherson, who worked on his own channel, currently under the name 3A Display, that was also partnered with Enchanted Mob, started helping out with the production of this untitled game. After a while though, Mob for whatever reason would scrap this project altogether and would begin to work on another game centered around toys that would eventually be known as Poppy Playtime, formerly known as other code names like The Toy Game, Toy Story But Evil, and Tina
Glad
Toy
they didn't
Time,
go with that one.
but still was the same
Tina
thing.
Toy Time?
The game
Sounds
was going to
interesting.
take a Toy Story inspired approach where you play as a child with parents who worked at what is called the Playtime Co. factory. But after they left for work, the various Playtime Co. toys around the house would come to life and chase the child down. This idea,
That
while
is one
pretty
big toy
interesting
or
on
one
paper,
small kid?
was eventually scrapped as the massive house ended up being extremely boring to traverse, and they instead ended on the much better idea of having the player be a former employee.
Glad they went
and
with this
come
idea.
to the factory
It's a lot better
itself
than
after it had been abandoned. At this point, Isaac, who had been trying to get his foot in the door the entire time, drew up an idea for a gameplay mechanic where we would acquire a doll, who we now know to be Poppy Playtime, and use the drawstring on her back to shoot her across the factory and grab stuff from far away, which would eventually be reworked and turned into the grab pack hand system that we see in the game today. At this point,
pretty
Mob
cool.
saw that Isaac had a vision and handed the keys over to him, naming him the director of the game. And from there,
Good for you,
he
Isaac.
started working on Chapter 1, which was originally meant to be this expansive first look at the franchise, with tons of areas to explore like office buildings, had an intro that took place outside of the factory, and dozens of puzzles to solve.
I wish we got that one
leading
at
up
least.
to an
Would've been
iconic
interesting.
meet with the chapter's first villain, Huggy Wuggy. They would launch a teaser
Huggy,
trailer
you sucked at
showcasing
times.
the character Poppy in May of 2021 to try and build some hype for the title, but this trailer would, generally speaking, not generate very much attention to the title.
Really?
And so, likely due to this, while developing, they had to scale back a lot of their original ambitions with the game quite a bit.
Makes a lot of
scrapping
sense.
a lot of the filler areas and shortening
Good.
the game to
We don't need
around
filler in a
20
game.
to 30 minutes. Regardless, though,
Filler
they
sucks.
kept developing and would create and release a trailer in September of 2021, showcasing some of the gameplay with characters like Bron the dinosaur and, of course, Poppy in another attempt to catch some buzz, while also to hopefully get extra funding for future chapters, would launch a Kickstarter project on the same day called Poppy Playtime, a horror game that's actually got gameplay, requesting $45,000
Jeez,
and
that's a lot of
advertising
money.
the game as a new revolutionary horror title. See, following the release of games like Bendy and the Ink Machine, one of the main criticisms was that it, among other games, were walking simulators, or
Yeah,
basically just a
those
game
suck.
that doesn't feature much gameplay gameplay and instead is focused on just walking around progressing the story. While Poppy
Poppy
advertises
does that,
itself
though.
as a horror game where the toys play with you instead and walking isn't the only mechanic. Here they discuss the game itself and its various advertised mechanics, while also showing ambitions like wanting to create a VR version and making future chapters
There is a VR
at
game
a
that
cost
someone
of
made.
just $5
If you want me to play it, let me
apiece.
know.
They even offered some rewards to backers, like getting a copy of Chapter 1 for donating $5, the soundtrack for $10, your name in the credits for $25, a Poppy Playtime background pack for $50, your own child drawing in the game for $100.
Oh, that's cool.
Art of your own toy in the game for $250.
I don't think that one
and
made it.
finally, have your own toy in the actual physical canon game
I don't
for
think that made it either.
$500. All expected to be delivered by December of 2021 if the funding goal was reached. However, once again, their efforts to get this game out there failed miserably.
Damn,
the
that
trailer
sucks.
barely got any attention, and the Kickstarter in its 1 month of existence only had $222 pledged
Damn.
before being
I feel
canceled.
sorry for them.
Everything at this point had gone wrong for the developers. So, with what budget they could afford to lose, they completed the rest of the game on their own and finished it months early, with the chapter slated to release on October 12th. Right before release, Mob had basically no hope of it going anywhere. Everything they've tried to do to get the game out there had failed.
Yeah, they
and
were-
It seems like it was going to be another game.
They basically were, what's the word? They were in an uphill battle the entire time, like straight up from beginning to end. They were in an uphill battle to get this game out, and I feel sorry for them. I do.
That nobody would ever
For a
pay
while.
attention to. However, they had one final plan to try and get some eyes on it. They found a bunch of YouTubers' socials and would email them
Ha,
with keys,
the wolf,
asking
moo,
to
and
play the game
meow
on their
videos.
channel
Those are
in
funny.
a Hail Mary attempt. Then, at last, the game launched. As mentioned, the gameplay in this shortened chapter was extremely simple. We play as a former employee of Playtime Co., which had since been abandoned. However, after receiving a letter from a mysterious sender claiming the employees were still there,
Did we
and that
figure out who
needed
sent that?
to
I forget.
find
Was it
a
Poppy who
flower,
sent it?
we enter the factory to investigate what happened. Where from there, after acquiring the grab pack, we come across this chapter's main attraction, Huggy Wuggy, who stalks us throughout the chapter up until the end, where he savagely ambushes the player and they are forced into a vent chase that, after escaping, brings us to the flower room containing Poppy and ending the chapter.
Yeah,
While
that vent
the
section
game
really
itself had
sucked.
basically no hype going into this point, shockingly, the emails that Mob sent out to YouTubers would get responses from
Dawko's a
big
fun YouTuber.
creators like Dawko, who said they'd play the game and would later on feature it on their channels, putting hundreds of thousands of eyes on the title. And as more and more creators began to do this and
It took me a few
showcase
years to play it,
one
but
thing
it was a fun game for me.
immediately clear. People actually loved the game. The grab pack mechanic was incredibly interesting. The story was what you'd expect from this genre of game, both intriguing while also secretive. But of course, the main draw was the main villain, Huggy Wuggy. I know Huggy has been an internet icon for so long that he's lost a lot of
I
his
hate
horror
Friday Night
sting,
Funkin'.
and
It's
to the
stupid.
outside community has been a character associated with content farms and
Screw
Skibbity
them.
Toilet and stuff like that.
Ew.
But I can't
Ew, ew, ew.
overstate how great of a character he was in this chapter. His first reveal is done perfectly, having him tower over the player seemingly lifelessly with the remaining
really
moonlight
was-
from the roof shining
it was
over
really
him.
amazing.
And his chase scene is still one of the best of all time. The
I hate it.
randomly opening and shutting vents as Huggy corners us is one of the most anxiety-inducing things I've ever played.
I hate it. I hate it.
legitimately felt like I had just ridden a roller coaster after the chase, and if you've played it, you know exactly what I mean. And plus, outside of the game, he's just a very scary-looking character. I mean, the
Definitely
only
at
reason
times.
I ever even checked the game out and domino affected years later to making this video was because after seeing Markiplier's thumbnail that showcased Huggy Wuggy, I was so enamored by this creepy Sour Patch Kid character that I had
I
to
never
go
saw
and
that. It
check
is
out
Sour
for
Patch
myself.
Kid.
And clearly, everybody else did as well, because this game began to grow a community of dedicated fans interested in the story, lore, and just the lovable character. characters. It even eventually got the coveted game theory episode
That's when
most
you know you
developers
made
can
it.
only ever dream of. The game was so successful that just a couple weeks
When
after
Game Theory
it
makes
dropped,
a video,
they launched a
it
little teaser
you
trailer
basically made it.
announcing a second chapter and teasing a brand new villain. However, with such a high profile comes a lot of natural criticism. At its core, the game was simple, scary, and a fun time, which most people generally agreed on. However, at the same time, many people were critical of the game for one main reason.
What
As
is it?
mentioned, the lack of budget and lack of hope in the project more than likely led to it being as short as it is, which isn't inherently a bad thing. However, they also still needed to make money from the game to
I know what it
recoup
is.
their losses. So it cost $5
Damn.
for less than 30 minutes of gameplay.
Well, if memory serves me correct, it actually started at $10 originally, but then it dropped down to 5. I think after the controversy. I think it was originally $10, but then it dropped down to 5. And once Chapter 2 came out, it basically became free, which really should have started at the beginning. Like, yeah, I know they needed to make money, but I feel like they could have done it a different way. And I'm sure he's going to mention the controversy on what they tried to and how they make money in the first place, because, oh my gosh, the way they did it was almost basically nuked their entire career right as it started.
It's honestly kind of unfortunate under the previously mentioned context that the game was supposed to be bigger, but it wasn't because of money constraints. So realistically, they kind of cornered themselves. However, I think people would be more understanding of this if it wasn't for their many other attempts to monetize the game that were a lot more frowned upon. Like, for one, their merchandise. After the game blew up, the developers were extremely quick to launch tons of merch for the game, despite it being so short to the point where they were literally launching shirts that were just pictures of VHS tapes because there was so little content to make merch about. Plus, as I'm sure you guys already know about, in December of 2021, once they began to work on Chapter 2, to tease and market the chapter, they released digital collectibles, or NFTs, that contained secrets for the next game. Obviously, these were a disaster.
If you fell for the NFT scam, I'm not sorry for you. You deserve to lose your money. You just did it to yourself. NFTs were a scam from the beginning. You lost your own money. I do not feel sorry for you in the slightest. You deserved it.
And put a whole new negative light on the series, whereas the smaller stuff like the price tag or the merchandise might have been acceptable on their own. All of this combined started to build the impression that the developers were greedy. Furthermore, an allegation that was made back when the game first launched, but especially started to build traction around this time, was another animation channel, Edgar Coaster, accused Mob of stealing from the game he was working on, Venge, with some side-by-side comparisons that definitely weren't all that similar, but it did also reference a previous drama between some of Mob's eventual employees in 2018 and 2019, where they were being rude and especially petty towards the animator after he blew up on the scene. And while this drama wasn't related to the Poppy Playtime game specifically and took place years before it,
they shot themselves in the foot so hard around this time.
It resurfaced and affected how people viewed at least the game's creators ever since. Speaking of comparisons, though, people were also quick to compare this game's story to Bendy and the Ink Machine, as both took place in abandoned factories where iconic characters were brought to life.
They started similar, but different. They spread it out differently at the end.
Of if Poppy was copying their story as well. Another drama was that they would also capitalize on this success further by immediately
was not
they
fun.
were going to make a movie.
We still have no info on this one, to my knowledge.
Which felt over ambitious at best for a game with only one chapter and cash grabby at worst. So Poppy had established itself as a great and quality game with some morally questionable decisions from the developers, both in their past and present.
Agreed.
But despite this, the game kept exploding immensely, especially
Super
across
Harbor.
YouTube.
Love their channel.
Maybe even too much, as naturally the game started to have tons of videos on the platform, be it theories, gameplays, or most importantly, animations and songs, whose popularity started to catch the attention of various articles and eventually news broadcasts that would begin to warn parents about the game's main character, Huggy Wuggy, specifically citing fan-made content like this music video from Try Hard Ninja, mistaking it for official, and accusing it of directly leading to children attempting dangerous activities in school. I made an entire video going over the history of these reports already. It's a huge
Fox
rabbit
is just
hole,
dumb at
but
times.
To summarize,
they don't do enough
really
research.
Took these news reports too seriously. Although on the bright side, it did draw attention to certain fan-made content, going as far as having a local sheriff's office call out specific channels, usually in the animation genre, for making potentially dangerous videos targeted at young children, including the game's characters. So it's safe to say that this game's explosion was an absolute nightmare. They would eventually release now deleted statements apologizing to Ecker Coaster on at least some fronts, claimed they donated all of their NFT proceeds, and would make separate statements against the news for their claims of mob targeting children to save face. But as bad as this era was, it wasn't without its positives, as Chapter 1 was made free a little while later, and eventually they officially started the rollout of their second endeavor, Chapter 2.
Which I still have yet to finish.
First, though,
I've still never finished Chapter 2. If you guys want me to finish it, let me know.
Initial merch drop video released on their channel, a link could be found hiding inside, taking us to this website where we could browse through various different parts of the Chapter 1 we just explored through security cameras that initially seemed pretty uneventful. However, over time, a Catbee character could be spotted laying on Huggy's room in blood before mysteriously disappearing. Then, over in the Make a Friend room, some long, stretchy arms were seen wrapping around the area, teasing some kind of new character coming in Chapter 2 that, thanks to the hidden message revealed back in the NFTs mentioned earlier, was revealed to be named Mommy Longlegs.
How do we ever figure that out?
To February of 2022, where the Chapter 2 gameplay trailer would be released, becoming Mob's biggest trailer until and ever since, getting tens of millions of views, showcasing the devs' first full-length chapter with new characters, gameplay mechanics, including new grab pack hands, all sorts of new puzzles, and of course its brand new villain, Mommy Longlegs. A pink, creepy, spider-like character that would be watching over us.
Yeah, she definitely seems creepy at times.
Now, this trailer was perceived super well and got people super excited for the chapter. However, there were some hiccups leading up to its release, like the release date of the title accidentally leaking for April before being delayed all the way until May 5th. But as the release date drew closer, the biggest question on people's minds was about how good this game would end up being this time around. Mob had gone from a studio with no expectations in Chapter 1 to having mountains of weight on their back in Chapter 2, being one of the biggest indie games out there. How would they handle building and releasing a full multi-hour experience? Was Poppy Playtime just a flavor of the month game that would die off once it tried something new?
Definitely seemed like it at first.
May 6th came and Chapter 2 released to an interesting result. Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 was meant to be the game that redeemed the franchise from all of the criticism.
It definitely did.
And while in a lot of ways this was definitely the case, it was also left with a significant amount of flaws and growing pains. This game takes place right where Chapter 1 left off and features a lot of similar themes, with lots of electric puzzles, an iconic chase scene with Mommy Longlegs towards the end, and of course many different characters and games to fill out the bigger runtime. Ending with us acquiring the train code to access the train, and teaming up with Poppy, who was supposed to let us escape, but betrayed us and changed the tracks to dig us deeper into the factory before the train crashes and the chapter ends. Flashing one final time to a sign that says Play Care. Now, first off, there were
2 years to get that
good redeeming things about this chapter that proved Mob was to be taken seriously. For one, there's its length. This chapter, in fact, takes multiple couple hours to beat, and while Chapter 1 felt more like a demo, this felt like the level of length and depth that Mob originally wanted to create when making these chapters. Another plus is that the game itself actually took full advantage of the grab pack, taking seemingly simple games like Whack-A-Mole or Red Light Green Light and forcing us to panically smack away devilish huggies or grapple around a playground while a hungry caterpillar, PJ Pugapillar, chases us down. The puzzles themselves outside of the mini games were also much more expansive and interesting, while the lore was much more fleshed out, shining a spotlight over the game's overarching villain, the prototype, and revealing there was once children that roamed Playtime Co. that have also gone missing. Furthermore, the final death scene in this game is absolutely stellar, where after running from Mommy Longlegs for the entire game, we finally get to kill her, but not just by dropping her into an abyss or something like that with Huggy, but rather by grinding her up into pieces while she screams.
Yeah, there's no way she didn't survive this.
Only for her head to drop off and the mysterious prototype to take her remains. This scene represented a tonal shift from the rest of the game and was something fans absolutely loved. However, this being said, there was also a lot of criticism about this game. For one, speaking on the horror, while this one scene was super well done, the rest of the game was noticeably absent of the same horror felt in Chapter 1.
Definitely felt horror at times for me.
Jump scares, of course, but throughout most of the game, things were usually bright. There was a lot of dialogue that took the immersion away, compared to Chapter 1, where its only villain, Huggy Wuggy, never spoke and just maniacally chased us. And overall, it felt like Poppy had taken a step back in the horror department and felt a bit more like a puzzle game with horror elements rather than a horror game with puzzle elements. This very much led to the popular stigma I'll discuss more that plagues a lot of mascot horror, that Poppy was this diet horror game for kids that was more focused on its colorful characters rather than providing something scary. The previously mentioned dialogue also made the game feel bloated and often boring, like they just shoved it in to fill time. And there were also a ton of glitches in this game as well. Like originally on some devices, the game would soft lock when pulling the berry cart, getting stuck in place no matter what, making the game completely unbeatable. You could also just skip the Mommy Longlegs final chase scene entirely by jumping up into this area up here and dying, which I did on my first playthrough and was left so confused. The bugs in this one were pretty intense. Plus, while their Kickstarter from last year had mentioned making every chapter a $5 add-on, this game was $10, bringing up the greed allegations to another level. But regardless, a lot of these criticisms were much smaller than the previous ones with Chapter 1, and Chapter 2 generally was a smashing success. In terms of numbers, the game had over 13,000 players playing it at once on Steam, which actually outdid the launch of Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, at least on Steam. People mostly loved Mommy Longlegs. The lore and gameplay, outside of the flaws mentioned earlier, lived up to the hype, and Poppy was in a pretty good state, at least compared to where it was beforehand. But while they were in a good spot for now, they wanted to go much, much further later in the year.
Oh yeah, Project Playtime, the game they just let die.
Following the release of Chapter 2, fans dug through the title's code to find that there were files listed under Poppy Playtime Multiplayer. And when loading them, players were brought to some kind of brick wall with Mommy Longlegs and Huggy Wuggy poseless sitting in front of it. People didn't know what this was, but quickly their sights would be shifted, as in August of 2022, the developers would release a brand new trailer for Poppy Playtime
Chapter 3, amazing game.
This trailer showcased various toys laying on the floor, rising up to show this weird gas mask, while the Playtime Co. founder, Elliot Ludwig, described a place called Playcare, which would end up becoming Chapter 3's location, as an in-house orphanage that stored children inside of the factory, also being mentioned in a Chapter 1 poster, and of course seen on the sign at the end of Chapter 2. Ending with a confirmed release release date of 2023. And while
Yeah,
it looked
no.
exciting for sure, the trailer
Oh,
was
wait, yeah, it did.
notably bare bones, and multiple months after Chapter 2, it seemed like the devs were very much
No,
taking
wait,
their
no.
time with this
It took
next
another
chapter
year.
if
That's right.
this is all they had to show for it so far. But that didn't mean there wouldn't be any content, as on October 12th of 2022, the Poppy developers would celebrate their 1-year anniversary of this successful title by posting a video with the game's director Isaac thanking everybody for their support along with the rest of the team. But quickly,
That's a big
people
team.
spotted that something weird was going on in this video, as looking at the anniversary art they drew on the whiteboard behind Isaac, next to Huggy, we could see this weird Jack in the Box, something we had never seen up until this point. And
How
at
long
the
did it
end
take
of
to
the
make that?
trailer, we see a glitch that shows the numbers 10/31/22, spelling out the date October 31st, along with some
Oh, that's
Latin
cool.
text that when translated said not what you expect, and the same Jack in the Box silhouette. So from here, it was a waiting game, and on October 31st, we finally got something. The devs posted an announcement for a brand new co-op game they were working on called Project Playtime, giving us a new teaser image along with an IP address hidden in the center. This was also met
cool.
with content creators receiving a letter in the mail from somebody named Rowan Stoll, panicking and asking the recipient to access their computer using the same IP. So to make a long story short, because it took all night to figure out what to do next, when connecting to the IP through an FTP server and a
Whatever that
password
means.
found in another document in the replies of the announcement, we were able to access a computer remotely that contained a video from the guy that sent said letter, Rowan Stoll, recording a report about apparently spotting cameras in the eyes of Huggy Wuggy and expressing concern. This started what is called an ARG, or alternate reality game, where
What
over
Poppy
time
Playtime's
more
now
and more
known
clues
for.
were revealed through these puzzles about the upcoming game, leading up to the end where after Rowan Stoll discovered all of these monsters were once children experimented on to use for work, he ended up getting trapped and eaten by the Jack in the Box character, who we
Poor
then
Rowan.
learned was Boxy Boo, a character that's grown into a fan favorite in the community, but actually was pretty controversial at the time outside of it, with a lot of people criticizing his general design not being very well done. Then, after finally solving this ARG, we were rewarded with 2 trailers for Project Playtime. One cinematic trailer finally showcasing Boxy in his full glory, and another finally showcasing the gameplay of Project, which essentially was Poppy's attempt at an ASIM like Dead by Daylight. 6 different survivors would try to collect 6 toy parts by completing puzzles throughout various maps and then would escape, while one player playing as a monster, Huggy, Mommy, or Boxy, tried to hunt them down. This game was slated to release on December 6th, but immediately faced a huge hiccup, as due to a major problem found on the day of release, the devs had to delay the game by multiple days, all the way until December 12th, where finally the title dropped, and once again, Mob was found in a new wave of controversy. While the game itself was a good idea and a good time when it worked, the short development time from Chapter 2 to now really showed, as it was extremely buggy and basic. Many of the icons were still development placeholders, the glitches were consistently game-breaking, the servers almost never functioned properly, making the game basically unplayable.
I feel like that one was due to like how many people just came into the game at one time. Like they don't have that big of servers to basically have that many people allowed at one time. Like I feel like that was the players' fault, not the developers. That one feels like it's more there's too many players, so sorry, we can't let too many people play at one time because then everything will crash. Like that one feels more like the wow, I'm now the player's fault, not the development.
And overall, Project Playtime was even more bittersweet than Chapter 2. As mentioned, it was certainly a fun time. The game performed super well, opening to over 16,000 players, and there was even a lot of
Exactly my
lore
point.
thrown into the game, like the introduction of Harley Sawyer, or the Doctor, the creator of the monsters we see in the games. But it just didn't feel finished, and the greed allegations from before were not helped by them adding a battle pass to this game for cosmetics
that
and
one
an
wasn't
item
fun.
shop, which also had its fair share of glitches, with the shop itself not working properly, making that aspect of the game also feel rushed and glitchy like the rest of the game, to the point where overall this project was extremely controversial. Some fans swore by the game with their life, and others absolutely hated it. Thankfully though, going into 2023, the developers started releasing various lore VHS tapes on their channel for the next chapter, while also releasing patches, events, and content updates to Project Playtime to fix a lot of the aforementioned issues, at least until October of 2023, where they would controversially abandon the game and not update it ever since,
Yeah, that
leading to it
sucks.
pretty much losing all of its audience, as they needed to spare more resources to work on their next chapter, Chapter 3.
The best chapter. I love Chapter 3. It took forever
So,
for
with
me to finally
Project
play it.
Playtime being completed and eventually ended, this meant it was finally time for Chapter 3. And honestly, going into this, people weren't too optimistic about Poppy Playtime. The various controversies, large amount of brain rot children's content that began to flood the YouTube space, inconsistent
That's not their fault.
releases, and how buggy their last game was, kind of gave Poppy an unserious tone in the discussion of mascot horror games. It was
That wasn't
seen
Mom's
as the
fault.
more
Content Farm wasn't
of the big major
wasn't their
horror
fault.
titles. However, going into Chapter 3, it seemed a big focus from the developers was to change this narrative. In July of 2023, the developers would drop a brand new second teaser trailer, along with a new ARG website that at this point would remain mostly vacant. As for the trailer though, immediately the devs showed they had something to prove here. This one didn't start with some generic creepy music or dialogue or anything. Rather, it started in complete silence, only broken up by crashing flames. We see the train crash site from the end of Chapter 2 and find the door to the Playcare orphanage. But as we go into the area, it's not some colorful, happy place, but a dark, silent graveyard. It flashes to the photos of children's faces, showing the despair in their eyes when they once resided here. We see a mauled up Huggy Wuggy dripping in blood, a massive mysterious creation towering over us to the sounds of children crying, and on the walls, messages to some kind of godlike creature are scratched in by a mysterious purple beast that drags us towards a deep dark hallway, only broken up by their glowing eyes and ominous red gas coming from their mouth, before the beast jump scares us and the trailer ends. This trailer was a complete mood changer in the franchise. Chapters 1 and 2
Yeah, this was the most horror-filled game there was,
but this
and I
seems
loved
like
it.
the moment where things got real for Poppy Playtime. This trailer immediately got fans and even critics extremely interested in what new direction Poppy was taking here, especially since they announced at the end of the trailer the game would be releasing in winter of 2023.
No, that
launching
took
the
a few,
hype to new
it took
levels,
until
and
the
going
next
into
year.
the end of 2023, things only got better, as eventually the developers would launch the Chapter 3 ARG, where once again the community dug through different documents and puzzles in search of clues on a computer website, where we learned that this creature in the trailer wasn't just one lone being, but rather a collection of
The
8
Smiling
different
Critters.
characters called the Smiling Critters, with the
I have the
purple
Dog
one
Day and
being
Catnap
a
plush.
cat named Catnap. Here we would be met with an entire cartoon and all sorts of lore about these critters, but Catnap stood out as being odd. We'd learn in the cartoon that he wasn't like the rest, never talking, and like in the previous teaser trailer, spat out this red gas that ends up putting the other critters to sleep, and later on we'd see Catnap get removed from the in-universe marketing as children reported horrific nightmares after purchasing the plush version of the character that, unlike others, emitted this toxic sleeping gas. Regardless, though, we learn in the ARG that this gas was intentionally created by Playtime Co. and was used to make a bigger body out of the character from a child named Theo to spit around Playcare and put all of the children inhabitants to sleep. Following this marketing push, the anticipation for this game was at an all-time high, as the Smiling Critters and their cartoon became debatably Mob's most popular creation yet. Yes, even more popular than Huggy Wuggy.
They're still more popular.
Critters, without Chapter 3 even being released yet, became like the most popular thing on the entire internet, as they were creepy in their cartoon, but also were super cute and marketable. Everybody in the community seemed to have a favorite Smiling Critter. But in terms of Chapter 3, as 2023 approached its final weeks, fans were starting to scratch their heads. There was still no gameplay trailer or final announcement going into December of that year, with some even worrying, like with their many other projects, it had gotten delayed.
It got delayed.
Sadly, this would end up being true, as they would announce on December 12th that Chapter 3 was going to be pushed into 2024. However, on the bright side, this was met with our very first gameplay trailer finally, where inside we got to see the game looks almost completely different than Chapter 2. The graphics are way better, the scenery is way darker, there are tons of new gameplay pieces and better animation, there are more locations than ever, and overall this trailer was phenomenally well received. Fast forward into 2024,
I'm surprised that's
we
not
got
their most
ourselves
loved
one
or
final
popular
trailer
video,
showing off even more gameplay and the full reveal of Catnap's bigger body, with the announcement that the game would be releasing on January 30th. And as that day finally approached, while expectations were certainly high, what fans would end up getting was possibly one of the best mascot horror entries of all time. Chapter 3 started off right after the train crash in Chapter 2, and after exploring the train station, we ran into a new ally named Ollie that directed us into Playcare, a large dome-like area that was noticeably more expansive than the little side room from the last teaser trailer, and was instead traded off for this huge mini-city with homes, schools, stores, and more, with our job being to go into all of these locations and power up all of their generators to repower the production zone where the red gas was being created and move it down deeper into Playtime Co., ending with Poppy and our other new ally, Kissy Missy, rewarding us for our task by showing us what happened to the employees, revealing a VHS tape called The Hour of Joy, where in an organized attack, all of the imprisoned monsters ambush the employees, killing every single one of them. Then, of course, to keep the game interesting while going on the lift to the next chapter, Kissy Missy gets attacked, which is where it ends. This Poppy Playtime chapter is probably as close to perfect as it gets, and it changed the entire way people looked at the franchise ever since. Beforehand, Poppy was looked at as controversial and in a lot of ways less mature than other franchises before it. However, while it didn't exterminate those claims, this one took the route of being significantly darker, both in its presentation, as we saw in the trailers and the gameplay itself, which is noticeably literally darker, but it also features a lot more graphic scenes, like Catnap literally getting impaled after beating him in his boss fight, or Miss Delight getting slammed by the door after escaping her school. But also, there's much deeper things like the lore itself, which goes into graphic and disturbing detail about the children that once stayed in Playcare being essentially tortured and used as science experiments for the profit of Playtime Co. Or after reaching the end of the playhouse, we walk in on the last remaining Smiling Critter body,
Dog Day is the most disturbing one.
Hung up in the prison, where the smaller critters feasted on him bit by bit like some kind of saw trap. This moment has even had full-blown videos talking about this one scene, calling it the moment Poppy Playtime was redeemed. But in my opinion, the best
I saw that video. It was a good video
that rivals the best moments in any indie horror game I've ever seen takes place in Home Sweet Home, the place where the children slept, where we were forced to walk through the red smoke, and as we explore, we begin to hallucinate long dark hallways. Throughout, we see messages alluding to us being guilty about something, while radio reports document one of Playtime Co.'s victims being discovered to the outside world. As we pass through where the children once slept,
this is the most horrifying terrifying
across our
part of the
old
entire game.
office. And going towards the sounds of children screaming, we come across one of the laboratories where they were experimented on and turned into these monsters. Then, in a VHS tape inside, the commentator begins to shame the player for returning as a demonic Huggy comes out of the TV and eats us, causing this nightmare hallucination to end and we wake up. This scene is done absolutely perfectly as it shows the player's reason for returning was actually a sense of guilt for what happened to the children and eventually the employees who went missing, feeling trapped in our own grief only for one of the monsters we helped create to come out and attack us like we deserved. It's a wonderful way of showing the player's emotions without them ever even speaking a single word, and I'd argue it's the best part of all.
Are we ever going to hear them speak or even see their face?
This chapter was absolutely
loved Chapter 5 does that.
Everybody, fans and critics both praised it.
Or at
it
least
had a
see their
comparable
face.
number of players to Chapter 2 with 13,000, and while the game definitely isn't perfect, as there are still a little bit of glitches, the smiling critters don't appear in the game as much as many people would have wanted to, especially Catnap, who doesn't have that many main focus scenes.
Yeah, that's
the
fine.
Game cost $15.
Oh, yeah, that one I'm not
so
a fan
another price increase. And the game on the first couple playthroughs can honestly be a bit confusing.
The one thing that I still hate about it is the fact that I had to upgrade my computer just to play it. Because when I first played it, it was a laggy mess. Like, I could not even get past the first area without it lagging like hell. Like, I turned the settings down all the way, and it was still incredibly laggy. Like, I had to wait until almost an entire year, almost till the end of the year, like I think October time, to finally be able to play it, because I upgraded my graphics card, which allowed me to play games like that. Because it was so massive, so much detail, so much everything prevented me from actually finishing it as a result. That's the one true criticism I have for Chapter 3, is the fact that I had to upgrade my computer to play it. That actually still pisses me off to this day. I had to spend over $300 just on a damn graphic card just to play one simple game. It was a needed upgrade, but it was one that I really didn't want to make that expensive.
Confusing. Other than that, most people consider this to be Poppy Playtime's magnum opus, the moment where the game peaked.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. Because Chapter 4, it did
Following the absolute massive victory that Chapter 3 was, everyone was extremely happy and satisfied with the game. However, if there was one thing that fans were still left a bit upset about, it was the turnover time and the delays to create these games. Chapter 3 got delayed multiple times internally, originally supposed to be released multiple months beforehand, and with them working on Project Playtime as well, it took over
They really should have scrapped that one.
See Chapter 3 following Chapter 2, and the thought of waiting another year and a half, if not more, for Chapter 4 worried fans. However, quickly,
I would have waited.
The mob devs made it clear in some public statements that we wouldn't have to wait nearly as long for the next chapter. So it seems like basically everything was going perfect for the Poppy franchise. However, right after this, multiple big problems emerged. For one, mob would post at the start of the year that they would be releasing a Poppy multiplayer game with Jazzwares on Roblox. That was
I hate Roblox,
pretty
especially
terrible,
nowadays.
And when there was already a Poppy multiplayer game in Project Playtime that they abandoned, releasing a much lower budget Roblox game felt like a slap in the face of fans of that title.
Agreed.
But two, relating to the chapters themselves, something I intentionally left out was that back in December of 2023, multiple developers announced that Chapter 3 was going to be their last chapter working on Poppy Playtime, and from then on would be leaving due to managerial and creative differences, with the most notable one being Isaac, the director of the last 3 chapters, who announced his departure in March of 2024, leaving Chapter 4
that definitely explains a lot.
hands of many new people. Around this same time, people also discovered Mob Entertainment's Glassdoor Reviews, which is a website where people review companies that they work for, where allegedly Alleged former employees described the mob workplace as toxic and at worst abusive, which gave a new light into why a lot of these employees might have been leaving and
Not
why
good.
there were consistent issues with projects getting delayed and stuff like that. It's really difficult to gauge how many of these reviews are from actual workers or how true the things they were saying were.
I would say at least 90% are accurate.
Where people were leaving and others were anonymously saying some super serious things. So even though their
80 to 90%
was their
I feel like
best
are
yet,
actual
many fans
employees.
were wondering how mob
Maybe
would
more,
move
maybe more.
forward and how this all might affect the future of the games. And well, like expected, Chapter 4 would roll out much earlier than Chapter 3. In September of 2024, the first teaser trailer for the chapter would drop, where this time they would reveal a new set of characters,
the most controversial
critters, showcasing Baba Chops.
The most controversial toys to ever be made, the Nightmare Critters. Just because of how popular the Smiling Critters were, they had to make a new group. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the Nightmare Critters. They're a great asset, but they were just used so badly. Like, the lore sense, they were made perfectly, in my opinion. How they used them in the game, absolute garbage. No excuse. Like, it was terrible from start to finish. Like, they were so badly used, especially the Baba Chop boss fight. Like, you could remove that section from the game and nothing would change. That's how I feel about it. Nothing would change from if that section was removed. Yeah, not fun. Not fun indeed.
In the trailer, and later on revealing 7 other ones, which were essentially the Smiling Critters, but with negative traits instead of good ones. This trailer and reveal immediately began to raise alarms for fans of the franchise, as first off, the Nightmare Critters themselves were not popular and were accused of just trying to piggyback off the success that was the Smiling Critters, and were nothing more than content farm or Benji X Scarlet Baits. While the trailer nothing more than content farm or Benji.
Who in the hell is that? And I don't really want to know. If you guys want to tell me in the comments, you're more than welcome to, but I'm not going to look them up myself because they seem like a content farm kind of channel. Yeah, that seems super dumb.
Scarlet Baits. While the trailer itself was very obviously made in a pinch. It had music playing over the entire thing with no audio. There was a bunch of animation errors with clipping and things even just randomly flinging around, which obviously immediately concerned people. However, while this was all worrying,
I never noticed that.
From here actually went smoother than ever. As once again, the devs would drop another computer-based ARG that this time was super creative, with puzzles not just online but also in real life where people could find real items teasing upcoming characters.
I wonder how many were sold on eBay.
When the next teaser trailer dropped, they revealed a new,
because I know Sheep Rampage got one, but I'm not sure who else got the other 2, because if memory serves me correct, there was 3 in total. Sheep Rampage lived near one of them, so he got it and actually reviewed it on his channel. Like, so that one we know happened. The other 2, I don't know who else got those. Like, for all I know, they're being sold on eBay or some other auction place right now and being sold for like millions of dollars because they're that popular, that wanted. Like, that actually just feels a little scummy and stupid in my opinion, but whatever.
Monster Yarnaby that was super well received and loved by fans,
such a good dog,
showcasing this new area known as the prison, where the failed experiments were stored and tested, including this sideways face monster. Furthermore, they would reveal another new character in Pianosaurus through a YouTube short, and perhaps most interestingly,
they could have removed him and nothing would have been a loss.
One of the
I feel sorry for him.
Main villains in the lore, Harley Sawyer, was actually still alive and would show up in Chapter 4 as this TV-headed being that was hardwired to the entire factory and was watching over us the entire time. These teasers had fans going insane for Chapter 4. If
it was used so badly as well.
This game was more exciting than Chapter 3. The story seemed darker than ever. The trailers were essentially mini movies, and furthermore, in the last Doctor trailer, we got our final release date of January 30th, 2025. Just 1 year after Chapter 3.
I would have
The only
wanted
real
it
hiccup
later.
at this point was that Mob would re-release Chapters 2 and 3 onto console around this time, with the Catnap banner art being traced from a fan render, which is unfortunately extremely common in this industry.
I'm sure it was
when
by
artists
accident.
are looking for
At least I hope
references,
so.
sometimes they get mistaken between what's real and what's fake, but thankfully this was fixed within a few hours, and that's really where it stood. But the next major issue that arose in this Chapter 4 rollout is the developers were noticeably extremely shy from showing any gameplay. There weren't any gameplay screenshots, gameplay trailers, not even any gameplay info from the developers, so it led to the question, where is it? Well, about 1 week before launch,
that really
we would
sucked.
finally get the gameplay trailer, which would reveal the chapter's main character, Doughy the Doughman, along with, of course, our first look into the gameplay itself. Now, the trailer itself was good and up to par with the previous ones, but why were they holding back showing off the gameplay and the
So many
chapter's
bugs,
key
so many
character
glitches.
for so long? Well, the good news is that on January 31st, Chapter 4 would end up releasing on time. However, when this chapter released, fans were generally mixed on this game, especially after the success of Chapter 3. Fans absolutely loved the story of the game as it dove more into the backstory of not just the creation of Playtime Co. and the monster's creator Harley Sawyer, but also what happened to the remaining toys after the Hour of Joy,
Tiny
being
Kissy.
left mostly in anarchy, while others formed a group in the safe haven to hide from the prototype who was after them. The various characters in the game, like Doughy the Doughman and Yarnaby, were lovable and had super interesting stories in their own rights, while there were a ton of big twists and turns this time around, like learning that our friend Ollie wasn't actually ever our friend, and was instead
Of course,
the prototype
we knew that from day one.
a child's voice to trick us, while also learning the true reason Poppy made us come down here was to blow the entire place up, which is what we tried to do in Chapter 4 unsuccessfully. The ending was also extremely tear-jerking too, as we are forced to kill Doughy, who in a fit of rage attacked us, followed by us getting left alone when Poppy ran away from us out of fear of the prototype, and
Coward.
Missy was lost in an explosion by the prototype who stole all of our explosives. We also finally saw the return of Huggy Wuggy, who had survived his fall in Chapter 1 apparently, with a predictable but by all means welcome return for revenge. The game was also filled with great scenes graphically, like the toy graveyard. However, while there's a lot of pros, in terms of flaws, there's also quite a few. As for one, it was clear the reason this game didn't show off that much gameplay is because the story was clearly put at the forefront of this chapter, which, as mentioned, was done well, but it led to the gameplay being pretty underwhelming and underbaked, filled with areas that were boring, areas that were extremely frustrating, like the Yarnaby boss scene, and of course there was a fair share of glitches. There was also a lot of other things that people were just generally disappointed about after the big marketing push, like that Pianosaurus, who had his own teaser trailer, was used for one cutscene and that was all. And of course, once again, the price of the game went up to $20.
Yeah, that one I didn't.
For a game that many people thought was a step down from Chapter 3 felt a bit ridiculous. Overall, Chapter 4 was not necessarily perceived as a bad game, especially as a lore lover. I got everything I could have ever wanted out of it. However, based on the super high expectations set with Chapter 3 that people were hoping they would surpass, and with the game having such an interesting set of gameplay mechanics that were kind of neglected this time around, Chapter 4 was simply put disappointing. The game got absolutely nuked on Steam. A bunch of creators made videos discussing this backlash, and overall, Chapter 4 was a game that was built to tell a wonderful story first, but failed to supplement it with gameplay that pleased the overwhelming crowd.
You need to find a right balance.
This leaves us in probably one of the most interesting times in the Poppy franchise. this. Millions still love the game itself, and it's debatedly more popular than it ever has been. Numbers-wise, Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 drew 25,000 players on launch day, which is just shy of what Chapters 2 and 3 brought in combined on Steam alone. There has been much less company controversy as of late, as Mob has grown as a studio, but also at the same time, Chapter 4 showed that there are also some warning signs in that the new direction the game took without a lot of its Chapters 1 to 3 staff might have had an effect on it in a negative way. And now, very similar to other chapters, I think we're all left wondering what is next for Poppy Playtime and how will they respond to this backlash for the upcoming Chapter 5? Well, I'm not sure, but to end on an optimistic note, we saw the game come back from some of the most controversy I've ever seen, both valid and non-valid, to reach this point. So I think if they can do it once, they can do it again, even bigger and better, especially now that the game is unfortunately reaching a point where it's probably almost over. So now that the studio is bigger than ever and also more popular than ever, I have confidence they'll be able to come back from this and finish the rest of the game with a bang. But I guess only time will tell. Thank you guys so much for watching.
I will say this game series is definitely an amazing series. It's fun to play this game. It's really fun to just also speculate what they're going to do next. 100%. I love Poppy Playtime. No doubt about it. But you can not come. But it still sucks. How they treated the game series. Or behind the scenes, that is. This game series is so much fun. I really love enjoying it. It's so much fun. I want to learn the ending, and if they do only a 5th chapter, which is usually the final chapter, they need to make sure it goes out with a bang and not a whimper, because Chapter 3 is still their best game, with Chapter 4 being just actually sometimes worse than Chapter 2 and 1, which really sucks. So how I would rank the games themselves, I would say Chapter 3 is the best, Chapter 1 is pretty good, Chapter 4, and then Chapter 2. I would only put Chapter 2 at worst because I still have yet to beat it because of how bad the game ran for me when I first played it. I still haven't played it since I upgraded my graphic card, so maybe I might check that out later. But this game series is definitely a lot of fun, but it definitely is annoying at times. But for now, thank you all for watching this. I had a fun journey with this and learning the entire fall, rise, and almost fall again of Poppy Playtime and Mob Games. But for now, thank you all for watching this. I'll see whatever I post next. Yeah, bye guys.